Nurses, what last words from a patient's final breath will you never forget? I was lucky. My dad passed 3 days after I got back from a long trip abroad. We had a pretty tough relationship the last 10 years he was around. A miserable, sick drunk, and a strong-willed a-hole kid who thought he knew it all. His second to last text to me was, quote, "You don't care about me." His last text to me was, "I love you, buddy." In the hospital, about 24 hours before he passed, I put my hand on his face and said, "You did a lot more good than bad." He grabbed my hand and said, "I'm proud of you." That was the last time he spoke. We didn't fix everything, but we got it straight in the end. And as someone who went through something similar with my own father, having that closure before they pass away is so valuable because you don't have any regrets, any what ifs haunting you. So OP, glad to hear that you were able to sort that out before he passed. Next story. My brother, sister, and father were all gathered around my mother at the end, and she opened her eyes and asked for a hug. Her last words were, "Give me a hug." We all hugged her and she closed her eyes and that was it. F cancer. Next story. It was a complete stranger online. His last words before the DM went quiet were begging me to never forget that he'd existed and that he'd loved playing the violin before severe depression took it from him. He said there was no one else left to remember him or those things, and he was so scared he'd be forgotten, like he'd never even been there. I still remember and will always remember you, Rob, and you did exist. Edit. I went back and read the log of the conversation for the first time in almost 9 years. We only spoke for maybe 20 minutes. He was already fading by the time we spoke. There are a lot more details shared in that short time that I'll hold back from sharing because of the nature of them being upsetting in very specific ways. I was, however, reminded that he was the source of a phrase that bounces through my head frequently. His last message was only 4 words. I only wanted love. Next story. I'm a retired firefighter/medic, so I've heard a lot, a whole lot. But the one I remember the most was my grandfather. I was the only one with him in the hospital. He was in and out of consciousness and not very lucid. Then he opened his eyes, looked at me, and said, "We had a hell of a time, didn't we, son?" And then he died. My grandfather raised me, and he was like a father, grandfather, and best friend rolled into one for me. And yes, in the 30 years I knew him, we did have one hell of a good time. Next story. My dad passed of lung cancer 3 years ago. The anniversary is in 3 days. I feel like I have 3 sets of last words for him. One was when we went to his old restaurant, one that he and his father owned. Every Christmas we had carolers and he would often introduce them, say something special about a certain customer or employee. They would then dim the lights and sing Silent Night. It was also so special to him and the customers. He went basically a week before he passed, might have been to the day, and everyone knew it was his swan song. It was really nice, and anyone close to him was trying their best not to cry. He thanked the people who bought the restaurant, the coworkers who were still there, named some of the people that will be missed, and said something kind about an old customer. The one I had closest to my heart was Christmas Eve. He had stopped eating and drinking, and I offered him whatever he wanted. He asked for a cup of coffee, and I sipped it and just gave a very warm sigh and said, "That's nice." I think I sat and read with him for a while after that. Christmas Day, he didn't really wake up. We hoped it was just bad emotions, but by the time dinner was wrapping up, we were pretty confident it was the end. We told everyone to come see him tonight or tomorrow, and kept him as hydrated and on pain relief as possible. When I was giving him a syringe of something, he pushed his lips together, and I said something like, "Come on, Dad," and he replied, "I don't know what you're doing." It, for some reason, felt so devastating. I told him I'm trying to give him his pain meds, and he popped his mouth open wide. He definitely wasn't doing well, and looking back, that made it clear. It was almost cute, like when you convince a kid to take their medicine. He passed on the 27th at about 6:30 in the afternoon, surrounded by me, my sister, and my mom with other friends and family in the house for him. I felt bad because I asked my aunt to go get him a pulse reader because he wasn't doing well. She actually seemed thankful and thought he might have been waiting for just the core family to go. I miss him nearly every day, and Christmas is so hard now. Yeah, it's tough when someone passes on or around like a holiday or a major landmark event because forevermore you're always going to associate that event with the passing or the trauma associated with, what happened on that day. So I totally get that. Next story. Retired paramedic. I've heard hundreds of last words. Many are what you'd expect. Help, no, etc. Maybe one of my favorites was a woman who had a brain bleed out of nowhere. Her boyfriend called because she wasn't acting right and was throwing up. She was unconscious by the time we got her to the ER, but she was not making sense when we were evaluating her. That's just my boyfriend. He poisoned me again. And here, take this. They'll rob me in the hospital. As she took like $2,000 out of her bra and tried to hand it to me. One that wasn't a person's last words, but very well could have been. I don't want to die thinking about major pain after I made a bad joke to a pretty critical trauma patient. They were laughing as they said it though, so I'll count it as a win. Next story. I don't think I'm in the game plan. I was playing pickup basketball with a heavier middle-aged guy. He was on the other team and I had to guard him. He was a nice guy I knew from the gym, but we were never close with each other. He had all these young guys on the team that day. They kept chucking it up and never passed the ball to him. I was guarding him, and after a while, it was obvious they were never going to pass it to him. So jokingly, I said to him, "When are they going to pass it to you?" Then he chuckled and said it. Just after our exchange, the game ended. As he walked off the court, he collapsed of a heart attack and died. Next story. My father died in my arms with my mom standing next to us. He was going through some in-home physical therapy when his heart gave out. My mom put her hand on his face and asked him, "Do you know who I am?" He whispered, "Juliet." They were married for 56 years, and his last word was her name. Next story. My aunt was passing from cancer at 33 and had been in a coma for about 2 weeks. She was living her final days at home. It just so happened that my family, my parents, her brother, and sister-in-law, and sister decided to visit her that day. When everyone was around her on her bed, she stirred, opened her eyes wide, and raised her arms extended in front of her. She said, "It's so bright, I can't see the door." To which my mother replied, "You can do it. Just reach for them. You're ready." She then made a motion of opening double doors, smiled, said, "It's so beautiful," then closed her eyes. She passed about 30 seconds later. It was absolutely amazing. I hope I have the peace she had when she left. Also, F cancer. Next story. Not exactly their last words, but the last words that she heard. So it was my turn to say goodbye to my mom. I held her hand and thought about what to say for a couple minutes. I was 15 at the time, and I just said, "I love you, Mommy. I promise I'll be okay." And right as I finished my sentence, she took her last breath and opened her eyes for the first time in days, looking right into mine. It was really, really special. I think about that promise often. Next story. Am I going to heaven? A 7-year-old boy. Guess I effed up that one, huh? Teenage kid who just wrapped his car around a power pole. For emergency rescue, you're not doing a lot of rescue right now. 33-year-old mother of 2. All were in the car that was hit by a fatigued truck driver. No one survived, although the truck driver lasted 6 months before taking his own. Don't let me die. I don't want to die. 46-year-old father of 1 lost control of his car, sliding off the road into a fallen tree before becoming impaled on said tree. Before you ask, my response had been to ask if there was anyone he wanted me to call. "Mate, did you bring lunch with you?" 26-year-old male. Car spun off the road after putting a wheel in the gravel to let him pass. Car quickly caught fire. Some bystanders stopped to help put out the fire along with calling us. They dragged him out of the car. Ambos arrived on scene first and tended to him, and the people who stopped, smoke inhalation. My truck arrived approximately 3 minutes later. Made aware of the driver conditions and that they were unable to move him due to his injuries, and that having already been moved has likely caused inevitable loss of life. So I sat down and held on to the hand of my best mate for another 9 minutes. Also, my last day on the job. Safe to say, I was done. Next story. Was at the scene of a bad wreck on an interstate in Texas. Guy was conscious and on the ground with paramedics. His dog was in the car and was limping around the scene checking on him. Just so happens he was also a retired doctor. He kept checking on his chest, ribs, etc., and knew he had severe internal bleeding and wasn't going to make it. He told the paramedics this and asked them to ensure the dog was taken care of. Then he passed. The dog was given to his family and was well taken care of. Next story. My husband's last words to me before he crashed and never woke up were, "Can you have a smoke for me, babe?" And my reply was, "We've been through this. I can't take a pee for you either, love." January 6th, 2024. Christmas sure is different this year. Hold the ones you love tightly and tell them what they mean to you. Next story. My dad. He didn't get to speak because he was dying from COVID. We weren't allowed to visit, so we could only text until it got to the point he was intubated in the ICU. That's where I had to give the okay to take him off life support and say goodbye, but he was unresponsive. His last text said, "I love you. Good night, sweetie." He died 12/23/21. Next story. No, but my grandma left letters written in her house to be found after she died. They were addressed to various family members and told them all the things she hated about them. My mom and I found them. The grandma was my dad's mom. One was for my mom. Standard, you kept me from having a good relationship with my son and grandkids. It's your fault they aren't Catholic. That kind of stuff. Next story. Longtime hospice professional. My only word of advice related to this is not to reply on your deathbed to say what you need to say. I can remember very few last words of any of my patients, despite being present many, many times. Confusion, lethargy, and other symptoms very often get in the way of clear communication hours to weeks before death. Next story. My aunt, while in a 3-year-long battle with cancer, was on her final journey in the nursing home. She wanted to be surrounded by friends and family. There were about a dozen of us there, which is customary in native culture. She started going in and out of consciousness, gasping for air, and said, "Oh, here it comes." Then she let out a deep breath and what appeared to be her final one. Then a minute later, she gasped for air and said, "False alarm." I couldn't help but laugh. She was always a prankster, and I knew what happened the second she said false alarm. She was pranking all of us for the final time. As the hours went by, she got worse and finally lost her battle. Her final words were, "Oh, that's beautiful." Next story. My child will come. You will see. My grandma died of cancer during the night and told that to the hospital personnel. My mother, her child, thought about driving to the hospital that night, but decided not to because of reasons I don't remember right now. She blames herself to this day. I was too young to understand the significance of visiting. I hate it as I write that. She was also just in her mid-50s, so she could still had like 20 years. God damn, life is unfair sometimes. Next story. My mom, at the end of a fight with cancer, said, "I don't like this. This is what happens to you when you're dying." I reassured her that she was going to be with her brother and her mom and dad and my brother-in-law, and that they would all welcome her. She passed away later that night, and I've never told anyone what her last words to me were. Next story. My grandma's last words were, "I love you too." She whispered it to me. I told my mom when my grandma said it because she hadn't been able to speak in a while and she was in hospice. My mom said she doesn't know what's going on. She would have said it to anyone. Still, one of the most evil things my mom ever said to me. Yeah, true or not, fact or fiction, that's just not the time or place. Really, there is no time or place to make a comment like that. Shame on you, Mom. That's terrible. Next story. One was sweet, one was terrifying. Starting with the worst, my grandfather, who'd lost his mind, was asking me and my family who we were. My dad looked heartbroken, but was angrily telling him again, over. He heard his age and said, "Nuh-uh, I'm 10, and repeated it tiredly about a dozen times before he died. F Alzheimer's. The other was something to remember. My grandmother told me to be the best woman I could, and that she'd always be proud of who I became. I had just come out to her as a trans woman a few months earlier, before her rapid decline. My grandmother raised me more than either of my parents. I miss her, but I'm still going to do her proud. Next story. The last words my mother told me as she was nearing the end of a 6-year battle against lung cancer that became brain cancer was, "You and your father wronged me for letting me die in hospice." Coming from a large family, most of whom didn't bother to see her much in the final few years, it was my father and I who put our lives aside to caretake her. She was a very extreme parent, loving but violent, nurturing on one hand and manipulative with the other, and protective but also endangering. I learned the hard way that closure is something only you may find for yourself. Next story. My daughter died from cancer in November. Her last intelligible words were, "Why are all my family here? I'm not going anywhere." She died about 16 hours later and mumbled a few times in between, but we could not understand what she was saying. It was colon cancer, and she was mid-40s. Get your colonoscopy early, folks. Next story. Not last words, but what I perceive is worse. My mom fell and broke her back earlier this year. She had a spinal fusion to fix her broken vertebrae. When she was recovering in the ICU, she had a massive stroke while I was in the room. The nurses had come in to make their rounds, and she was lying there, unable to move, with her eyes open, barely able to speak. They were prepping her to go for a CT scan, and I leaned in to tell her that I loved her, and with all her might, she whispered, "Let me die." But she didn't die, and she's been bedridden in a nursing home for going on 9 months. Her speech is only about 10% of what it was, and she can really only move her limbs to drink from a straw. She can barely swallow, so she's fed through a G-tube and anything above and beyond that's pureed so she can eat it. Her memory is almost gone and fading more every day. It's the absolute worst thing imaginable. Friendly reminder to you all, if you can afford it, buy a long-term care insurance policy. Also, make sure you have all your powers of attorney and advanced medical directives in place. My parents had neither, so my dad's been paying $13K a month to keep her in a nursing home while we wait on the Medicaid application to be approved. It's a financial nightmare. Next story. Worked in hospitals for years, heard a lot of final statements, but the one that stuck with me the most was my own great-grandmother. I went to see her and brought along my fiancé. The nurse said, "You can certainly visit, but she's not conscious." When we walked in the room, she was awake, recognized me, and spoke. She asked to speak to me alone, and when my fiancé stepped out, Great-Grandma said, "She's not the one for you. Trust me. You need to wait 3 years and find the one you need, not go for the one you want. Now goodbye to you. This is all for now." She laid back down and was gone, and she was right. Next story. His last attempt at a word? Mom. My grandmother outlived him and came to visit him with his senior dog, who she'd taken care of the day before he passed. When she walked in, we said, "Hey, look who's here," and he looked at her and attempted to say, "Mom," though nothing actually managed to come out. His last true sentence? "I want my chair." We'd been trying to get him into his bed because he couldn't hold himself up any longer, but he loved his chair, so in our struggled attempts, even though he hadn't been able to speak in hours, he yelled, "I want my chair!" My dad passed in March from his COPD. It's my first Christmas without him, so this is hitting hard today. Thanks for asking this because it's nice to share with someone who doesn't know it. Rest easy, Dad. I miss you. Next story. My mother was in hospice. We were always extremely close. We were lying in bed together. We watched Andy Griffith like that every night. She asked me if I had a cigarette, and I said yes. She said, "Let's share one." So we did. And as we did, she looked at me with a powerful, adamant look in her eyes. Then she said, "You know you're a good one. You've taken the best care of me. I'm going to have a heart attack." I, of course, said, "No, you're not." And she said, "Yes, I am too. You're the best daughter anyone could ever hope for." We shared a cigarette and then both dozed off. I woke up just a few minutes later and she was gone. I'll never forget the look on her dark brown eyes as she said those words to me. I can only hope I'll be half as good a woman as she was. Next story. According to my mom, my dad's last words were a sexual inside joke they'd shared for 45 years. He died of kidney failure and had lingered in delirium for several days. His rally was opening his eyes, saying that to my mom, and then going back to sleep, and he died about 24 hours later. Fortunately, my mom didn't feel compelled to share the dirty joke with me or my sister, so I don't know exactly what he said, but it's a good way for him to go out, I think. Next story. As a firefighter, I have to answer this one with LOL. In all seriousness, we tend to be the ones who hear the last words of a lot of people. The most memorable had to have been the car wreck I ran 2 months ago. 26-year-old female with heavy bleeding and lacerations. Nothing we could really do. She looked up at me lying halfway inside the car wreckage and said, "If you're an angel, then I'm ready for heaven." She passed within the next 3 minutes due to blood loss. Next story. I worked in a care home and one of my residents was crying and screaming, "I don't want to die alone." I coaxed her to sleep, left to care for another patient, and came back to make sure she was asleep, and she was dead. That was my first patient who died. She had severe brain cancer, and I, 19, now have a crippling fear of death. It doesn't matter how much of an amazing person you are, that lady was so sweet despite her pain. You're going to die alone. I'm never going to forgive myself for leaving her, even if I had to. I promised her she wouldn't die alone, that there were so many people who cared about her, but I left her. Next story. Ugh, this is a tough one. My mom, she was dying of lung cancer, which metastasized to her liver. The night she died, a blood vessel popped. I was there when the whole thing happened. "Call 911" was the only thing she could say. So I somehow remained calm and called 911. A lot of blood and crying, to make the long story short. The whole ordeal still haunts me to this day. I still get shivers when I hear an ambulance. That was 8 years ago. Next story. "I love you," said by my dad to my mom as he died from brain cancer. He was 57 and having nonstop seizures that medication couldn't control regardless of dose. He lasted about 7 days that way. Doctors said he couldn't speak after the grand mal seizure that sent him to the hospital by ambulance. But he spoke. We both heard it. Next story. I'm a former ER nurse. I once had a patient in her 90s who wasn't confused. I can't remember what she was in with, but she was medically stable. We were holding her overnight for observation. She'd been laying quietly and then suddenly yelled out to no one in particular, "All right then, let's get this over with." She took a turn for the worse and died a few hours later. I think she must have realized it was coming. Next story. My father was battling cancer when he passed away and was pretty drugged up at the very end. They knew he wouldn't make it and wanted to make him comfortable. He was only 37 years old. I was lying next to him in the hospital bed, watching Kiki's delivery service with him. Suddenly, he looked at me when Kiki was on the screen and said, "She's just like you," and started laughing. Then he said, "My beautiful daughter, my smart, sweet girl, I'm proud to be your dad. I love you, Violet." He died later that night. I was 10. I'm 21 now, and I miss him every effing day. Next story. My first wife. We were college sweethearts, graduated, moved across the country for good jobs, and bought a house. Tried to start a family when she was diagnosed with a terminal cancer. She was so strong that the end came quicker than I expected. We left to her regular chemo, but she was a little weaker than usual. I helped her into the car and then into the clinic. When we got in, the nurses knew. The doctor showed up and said he'd like to admit her to the hospital. We did all that and they got her comfortable. I held her hand and told her I loved her. She replied, "I know." And within a minute, she was gone. Yes, for all you know who you are, I'm aware of Star Wars. She wasn't a member of the rebellion and had no plans for last words. She was just tired. Next story. I've been in the room with hundreds of people who've died. The vast majority weren't able to speak. I have strong memories of many of them and their families. One that stands out was an older woman who had breast cancer with mets to her liver, and she was dying of liver failure. She had an enormous family, and they were all gathered in the room singing to her. Nothing religious, but clearly a song that she must have really liked and that I didn't recognize. There must have been 50 people in the room, of all ages, and they were all so joyful. I tried to be inconspicuous as possible, adjusting medications and adjusting her ICU monitor so the alarms wouldn't bother them as she died. I tried to sneak out, but probably received at least 10 hugs and expressions of gratitude from all these strangers on my way out the door. This was some time during the first couple years of my nursing career, which was quite some time ago, but it always stuck with me. Next story. I need to poop. We got the guy on a bedpan, and when we returned, he was gone. It was almost comical, but it was one of the saddest things I've ever seen. This little old guy had been ignoring some problems and hiding them from his family. He came in with stomach pain, and it must have been so much worse than what he was admitting to, and going on for quite a while before he caved in and sought care. Poor guy's abdomen was riddled with cancer to the point where he was beyond anything other than palliative care. I felt so bad for his family. They went from not knowing anything was wrong with their dad to thinking he had some sort of stomach issue to finding out he had terminal cancer to being told he was dead in the span of about 8 hours. Next story. 2 days before she died, my granny lost her ability to talk. The last thing she did while she could talk was motion for a glass of water, and then said, "Hard to talk. Love yous," and laid down for a bit. Hung on for those 2 days, only able to communicate by squeezing our hands and turning her head. Next story. A couple, unfortunately. Friend's grandpa, who was like a father to all the kids in the neighborhood. There were a dozen of us around his hospital bed when he passed. He said, "It's hot in here." Then he was quiet for 10 or so minutes, labored breathing, and then gone. Good friend and riding buddy of mine called to tell me about a close call he had, helmet intercom. Hung up with a "I love you, bro," and I told him to be safe. Killed by a car merging into his lane less than 5 minutes later. Not his last words, but my brother-in-law and I were talking on the phone about wood stain for a bench he was making his wife. Well, he was in the backyard putting it together. She came out to bring him tea 30 minutes or so later, and he was dead of a heart attack, a month before his 40th. Next story. Not their last words, but mine. The last thing I said to my dad as he woke up temporarily the night he died in the hospital was, "I'm going to have a son, and I'm going to call him George after you." My wife got pregnant a year later on our honeymoon, and our son George is now 10 years old and refusing to go to sleep as Santa's coming tonight. Next story. "Somebody help me, please. I'm going to die. Don't let me die." A patient of mine having a huge MI. Effing traumatized. All the doctors were clueless cardiologists who just stood there and didn't say a effing word to her as she screamed and finally went unresponsive. She died. I've had nightmares about her since. Next story. My mom was on the respirator for a few days. She finally got us to understand she wanted us to pull the plug after the doctor told us to consider hospice since they've done everything and it's still getting worse. After she only lived 15 minutes or so after disconnecting her, we did make out, "I love you, it's okay, I'm ready." My dad, my sister, my wife, and I held her hands until she was gone. It was a year and a half ago, and it was the hardest thing I've experienced. Next story. A patient of mine had no family members, friends, or even neighbors. I sat and held his hand as we decreased his oxygen and made him comfortable. He told me his best memory was seeing the Rolling Stones in concert in the 70s and how he would love to do that all over again. I found on YouTube a recorded Rolling Stones concert and played it for him. Beast of Burden was his favorite song, and it was the last song to play. Another nurse sat with us, and we sang along to the song. He smiled, nodded, and said, "This is really nice. I think I'm ready now." He passed within a moment or so. Next story. Maybe. My partner died suddenly and unexpectedly 2 months ago, and the last time we spoke, we were on the phone the night of his death. It was such a normal conversation, no indication that anything was wrong at all. He was alone in his flat that night, so there's a chance his last words were to me. I said, "I love you, night night," and he replied, "And I love you," kisses sounds, "bye bye bye," in his silly cute voice. Had I known this was the last time I would speak to him, I would have taken my time to tell him how much I love him. But I thought we'd get so many more tomorrows together. Take the time to tell those close to you how much you appreciate and love them at the end of every meeting, phone call, conversation, even if you think you'll see them again. Next story. My dad's last words, as it turned out, were "next track." We were playing an Alexa playlist off my dad's favorite artist when My Way came on, sung by Frank Sinatra. He preferred early songs for swinging lovers, Frank, not belted out in Vegas, Frank. At this point, he hadn't said anything to us in 2 days as he slipped away, but he summoned all his strength and growled this out. After that, he didn't speak again and lasted another few days, but it was evident he could still hear all his girls, so we just told all the funny family stories while we sat with him. Next story. When I was 14, a friend of mine unalived himself. Her depression was no secret, and she was already on therapy, but this day she called me. She said she was feeling awful and asked if we could read a little. I usually read to her when she was feeling down. That's what she meant. Narnia, Peter Pan, Alice in Wonderland, this kind of thing. So I did. I could hear her starting to fall asleep, which also happened often. Thought nothing of it. Last thing she said was, "Thank you, I love you." And when I asked if she wanted to keep going, yes. I discovered later that day she was not falling asleep. She had taken pills. Next story. Yeah, this one is kinda rough. I was working at a memory care unit in an assisted living facility. I'm actually pretty certain that place was hell. Not even kidding or exaggerating. I think it was the first circle of hell. Anywho, I was the only person on my shift, with 12 patients that had severe dementia and Alzheimer's. 4 or 5 of them were violently combative. My partner was doing F all, so I was doing everything by myself. I noticed one of our particularly problematic patients getting really agitated, so I notified a med tech to give him his PRN meds, to calm him down, because he was about to get rowdy. He came back and passed meds to everyone besides him. I asked her again, and she never came back. So, as he begins to get more agitated, I'm in and out of rooms cleaning up literal crap. I came out to ask my useless partner to help, and she just looked at me with this dumb look, and then looked at the aforementioned patient. This guy was a Marine, Olympic skier, and there were rumors that he was abusive when he was in his right mind. So, needless to say, he was in shape for nearly a 78-year-old. He walks straight up to me and proceeds to turn my nose sideways with a left hook. I was upset that I got hit, but I was absolutely livid that the medtech failed this patient. And because of her negligence, he got into a state of mind that he felt he needed to fight for his life. After getting hit, my first concern was to make sure he didn't hurt himself or someone else. So I got behind him and kind of bear hugged him, all while saying, "It's gonna be okay, you're safe, just relax," trying to comfort and reassure him. At this point, he ducked down and lost balance, so I followed him to the floor like I had been trained. At this point, he's basically lying on my lap, with me on my knees, still trying to comfort him and keep him safe. I remember saying, "It's okay, everything is okay," and his tone changed. He stopped fighting and calmed down immediately, saying, "Yeah, it's okay," at which point he died in my lap from cardiac arrest. I did CPR for a while, was the only soul in the building who actually knew how to do it properly, and at one point his granddaughter showed up for whatever reason to see me cracking her grandpa's ribs with compressions. We got her out of there quick, and eventually EMS showed up and pronounced him after running a full code on him. Something about the way he said those last words just suggests to me that he felt an overwhelming sense of comfort and knew he was going home. Effed me up a little bit because he had been a patient of mine for about a year and a half, so you get attached, you know? Anyway, the medtech covered her tracks and never got in trouble. The managers and medtechs that didn't know CPR didn't get trained any further in it, nor did they get in trouble. It's a required certification to work in any medical facility. The sheriff's office did an investigation to make sure that what I said happened actually happened, and found no negligence or wrongdoing on my part. However, there were people that still thought I killed him maliciously. Won't be forgetting that one anytime soon. Next story. My grandmother had a tracheostomy on, and the doctors refused to let her take it off. She knew she was leaving soon, and she kept gesturing for it to be taken off so that she could talk to the family one last time. In the end, she left without leaving a word, with her hands restrained to the bed rails. Despite the lack of words, her eyes told me everything that needed to be said, and I'm grateful I got to tell her that I loved her dearly. Next story. Grandpa said, "Well, that was it, I guess." My uncle told me, take care of Nick, his younger son that was a junkie and passed away a couple years later. He had 4 kids. For some reason, he asked me to take care of his youngest who lived across the country. A friend of mine who was one of the early COVID victims told me, tell my family I love them. Take care of your folks. Give your son something from me. My son was 4 years old then. I'm sorry. He was taken in a quarantine wing of the hospital, never to be seen or communicated with anyone again. His wife arrived 2 minutes after he was taken in quarantine, and she was denied any contact. He died, and he was delivered to his family in a sealed coffin. Next story. Not sure if these were her very last words, but she went to visit my grandma one last time, as we knew she'd likely pass the next day. She kept asking for water, so I asked the nurse to bring her some, not knowing that when someone's actively dying, they'll stop giving them food and water. When I told my grandma that the nurse said she can't have water just yet, my grandma lurched forward and, with more vigor than I thought her capable of, exclaimed, "Well, she's a female dog." These were very fitting last words for my grandma. If you're going to go out consciously, you might as well just do 2 middle fingers to the world if you really feel that way about people. Do it, Grandma. Do it. Next story. Stop. As they were putting in my mother-in-law's catheter, she broke her hip, started making a recovery, went to bed one night after asking me to stay with her, and was not responsive the next day. She had very strict end-of-care life wishes in place, which were essentially let her pass away. The doctor decided that a catheter would be the best to limit movement on her hip to keep her as pain-free through the process as possible. When they started the catheter process, she woke up and started screaming for them to stop. As soon as they were done, she went back to sleep and never spoke another word. Thankfully, my spouse was not in the room during this. Next story. My dad. He was in a coma, but muttered the name of someone we were trying to remember in a group conversation around his bed. I can't remember who the woman was, so she'll never know she was his last words. It showed me that people hear what you say when they're in a coma. Hopefully, he heard me say, "We love you," as he took his last breath. Next story. My grandma was on her deathbed. Super, totally out of it. I'm dumb and care what people think, even family, and I knew I was about to lose it and start crying. So I told my grandma I had to leave and that I loved her and hugged her. She said, "I love you too." Got in my car and boo-hoo cried all the way home. She passed away the next morning. Fast forward a few months later, my family and I were talking about her and stuff. Someone said, "You're the last person she said anything to, right?" I did not know until then, and it made me even more sad that I wasn't tough enough to stay and be with her for her last breath. Next story. My mom told me, "I just want you to be happy," as she slipped into a coma and passed shortly after. I lied and said I was because I wanted her to pass peacefully, but I think she knew. Wherever she is, I hope she knows now I finally am happy. It took me a long time to get here, but I am happy. Next story. My mom died at 55 to liver cancer. One night, before she went into the final coma, she woke me and the other care up by tapping her hospital bed. She said, "Please let me die," desperately. She was in pain, and the doctor refused to give her more morphine within a short time range. That statement haunts me. I failed her. I'm so sorry. It also changed me. I feel I'll never live until I'm in hospital. I may end it while I still have control over my own life. Who knows? Next story. Watched my dad die on Thanksgiving this year. My sister and I sat with him as he faded in and out of consciousness. Every time he came to, he was a different part of his life review. I didn't think it was real. From the hospital he was born in, his military service, college, grad school, teaching, and raising us kids. He recounted every milestone in his life. He certainly had no idea what was happening, barely conscious, yet perfectly articulated stories we've heard hundreds of times. The last coherent thing he told me was this: we've got to look out for each other. That's exactly what I intend to do. Happy holidays, y'all. Next story. I poured my heart out to my ex-father-in-law and pretty much told him he was the only other figure I'd ever known. I appreciated everything he'd ever done for my family, and I told him I loved him. I probably rambled for 15 minutes while he was using his last breaths on the hospice hospital bed in their living room. He slowly opened his eyes, looked over at me, and with a strained breath, he gasped as loudly as he could, "What?" My mind forgot his hearing sucked, and he missed everything I said to him, but it wasn't about me. Then he looked back at me and chuckled, then said, "Effing with you." Smiling, he passed about 5 minutes later with my ex-mother-in-law holding his hand and whispering in his ear, "I miss that old curmudgeon."